And a pleasant good afternoon to everyone out there in Irish Breakdown land. I am Vince D'Addario. That way. That is Ryan Roberts. And we are on day 3 of jury duty watch for Brian Driscoll. So he is still doing his civic duty today. So you're stuck with Ryan and I. And we are today going to talk about the fourth quarter of the schedule. So Brian and I have done 3 other shows. We talked about the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter. We break up the season into quarters, essentially. So 3 games, 3 games, 3 games, 3 games. We haven't done the fourth quarter game yet. So that is today. Ryan and I are going to talk about the last 3 games of the season. So you've got a neutral site. Well, technically it's an away game against Navy, but it's a neutral site game. It's usually in Baltimore. I believe that is where it is again this year at the Raven Stadium, right?
Yep, it is.
Yep. And then they come home for senior day against Boston College, and then they go on the road to finish things out in Southern Cal against USC. So we will be talking about those 3 games, how it affects the schedule, and all of those fun things. But before we get started, just go ahead and hit the like button now. Go ahead and subscribe, hit the notification bell so you know what time we're going to be here. 1 o'clock is basically going to be our baseline here for the summertime. We're not beholden to my school schedule anymore. So 1 o'clock seems to work out pretty well for everybody. So 1 o'clock is going to be the normal time of the show here moving forward in the summer. And then, of course, we will have some night shows periodically. And then when Sean comes on full time, there's going to be a night show Monday through Thursday. So a lot of fun, a lot of excitement moving forward. And but Ryan, how are you today, sir?
I'm good, man. So far, I think I may have the technical issues figured out. So knock on wood here. I think it's going to be a good show today. I'm excited about it.
Absolutely, no doubt about that. So let's just jump in here. I mentioned before that Brian and I had done the first 3 shows breaking down the first 3 quarters of the season. We came out of the first 2 quarters basically saying Notre Dame is going to be one of 2 things. They're either going to be 5-1 or they're going to be 6-0. And of course that has to do with the Ohio State game. There were some trap games in there, of course, maybe they stumble here or there, but I felt pretty confident that they're either going to be 5-1 or 6-0. Then you get into the third quarter and you've got Clemson sitting there in that third quarter. You've got UNLV, you got Syracuse, you got Clemson in that third quarter. Clemson is obviously the big one. Could they lose that game? Of course they could. So I think you're looking at 3 options coming out of the third quarter: undefeated, 1 loss, or 2 losses. I would be shocked if it was more than 2 losses coming out of the third quarter. But I want to get your thoughts on anywhere you want to go with the first 3 quarters of the season, what you think the record might be, how it lays out for Notre Dame, whatever you want to go with. The floor is open to you, sir.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're looking, the big breaking point in the season is obviously Ohio State and Clemson, right? Like those are the 2 premier games. So I think the best case is obviously that you are able to go 2-0 in that series. But even if you split in there, right, and you go into this final stretch at an 8-1 record at that point, right? I think you're setting yourself up for a pretty good opportunity because, I mean, let's be frank about it. Dependent upon if USC is a legitimate team or not, it's not the hardest last 3 game schedule, right? So
sure.
The main thing that I'm looking at, Vince, is like throughout this schedule that I kind of have up here, it's like you have so many different styles of offenses that you're playing. I mean, you're taking a look at Ohio State, which is going to be, more spread dictated, more of a pro style spread comparative to like what Clemson's been running. But we don't know what to expect from Clemson. You're going to see Dino Babers in a little bit of the air raid in the Syracuse game. In this last quarter, you're going to see a little bit of the triple option, obviously with Navy. You're going to see a pro style team in Boston College. So many different styles of teams, which makes it really interesting. But I think you're going to go into this stretch. At worst, I think it's going to be 7-2, but I think you could be 8-1 heading into this final stretch, and hopefully not 0, but I mean, just a realistic outlook for it.
Absolutely. And I think a split is realistic of those two games. So going 1-1 would obviously put them at 8-1. And I think that that's very realistic, especially going into the final 3 games. And if you look at, again, it is June 2nd. So there are certainly questions about all of these teams, Notre Dame included, that we don't have answers to yet. I mean, a lot of them. So is North Carolina going to be as good as some people think that they're going to be, having to replace their quarterback who's now in the NFL? You know, can BYU bounce back? And I shouldn't say bounce back, but continue what they've been doing the last couple of years, right? There's a ton of question marks out there. And if you look at the quarters, right? If you're looking at the 3-game stretches, I think you could make an argument that this final quarter, this final fourth quarter, is the toughest of the 4 quarters. If you're looking at the compete level, the talent level of the teams that are in the quarter, you could make an argument for the second quarter because you've got BYU and North Carolina in there. Those teams are, I would say better than average, right?
Sure.
And Stanford is kind of a toss-up. Not really sure what you're going to get from Stanford. They haven't been good lately, but they've had a decent, could they be decent? So that could be a 3-game stretch where you're at least playing decent teams, because I think the other quarters, you've got stinkers in there like Cal, UNLV, what are we going to get from Syracuse? They've all got the big game in there. They got the Clemson, you got the Ohio State, you got the big games, but then the other 2 kind of fall by the wayside for me in a lot of these quarters. So could this fourth quarter be the most competitive? Now, Navy is not a good football team. They haven't been a good football team for the last couple of years, so I'm not counting them, but Boston College, Phil Jurkovec coming back to Notre Dame Stadium. There's going to be a whole lot surrounding that. Plus, you add in the fact that it's senior day, last home game for these guys, and then you go out to Southern Cal. So what are they going to be in the last game of the season? That's a huge question mark right now, right? So what do you think about this being potentially the toughest quarter of the season down the stretch?
Yeah, I would say that the give me games, I guess is what we're going to call them, right? Like in that first stretch where you have like a Marshall, for instance. Marshall has been competitive at points, but I mean, they're breaking in a new quarterback, obviously with Grant Wells transferring to Virginia Tech. You look at a UNLV team has been down for a long time, man. Like they just have not been a good program at all. And I guess in the last stretch that we're talking about, Navy at Baltimore, Boston College at home, and then going out to USC in LA, I would say that obviously Navy is the give me game, but even in that one, there's rivalry there, right? Like there's a tradition to that game. Navy's going to come into that game. They're going to play a tough game. Like there's no doubt about it. So I agree to the subscription that maybe not the best team is in this stretch, but I think the worst team is better than maybe any other worst team as far as the quarters are broken up. So I can definitely get on board with that. Yeah.
And I feel like the second best team might be the best second best team. You know what I mean? But again, I think it's either a boom or bust with USC. They're either going to be pretty darn good this year and have a decent record going into that it's final game for Notre Dame. I don't believe it's a final game for them. They're either going to be pretty darn good or it's going to be a dumpster fire. Like, I don't know that there's any in between for USC. Now, maybe I'm wrong and maybe I'm projecting and hoping that that's the case. But I just don't know that there's going to be much of an in-between for USC. And right now, obviously, people are projecting that USC is going to be really good. Everybody thinks that they're going to be good, at least from what I've seen. And I don't necessarily believe that, but they're going to have a bunch of talent, at least at the skill positions.
Well, they're going to be incredibly talented at the skill positions. But as Brian pointed out the other day, when is USC not actually talented at the skill positions, right?
Cool.
I mean, I think the difference is that Caleb Williams is an obvious upgrade over what Keaton Slovis has been the last couple of years. I liked Slovis as a freshman, but he just has regressed over the last couple of years. I think that's partly due to the coaching staff that was there with Clay Helton. I think that's partly due to just a little bit of injuries from his shoulder in that instance. So you're going to upgrade the quarterback position. I'll say this, Vince. I actually just posted a clip on Twitter this morning. My main hiccup to giving USC any type of expectations for being that good is, man, I watched Isaiah Foskey and Jason Adamalola just destroy that offensive line, man. It was awful last year. And you're only bringing back one guy. And I understand that addition by subtraction is sometimes good, but you can't talk me into that offensive line is going to be great in 2022.
Right.
Like, you just can't. And then that defense too. I mean, you get Shane Lee over from USC, who's a linebacker that's played a little bit, but otherwise, I mean, you lost Drake Jackson. You're betting on a lot of unproven talent on the defensive side of football. And I honestly, and I've been very consistent on this, I'm not a big Alex Grinch fan. I'm not. Like, I think that the chaos approach is fine. I can respect some aspects of it, but I just can't get behind it because it's just so fundamentally unsound. So you're depleted at offensive line to enter the year, and your defense is a big question mark too. So those two things usually together are not the recipe for success.
Yeah.
I think ultimately they're probably a 8-4 type of team. So I think they definitely are better than the 4-8 they were last year. But I'm not buying in them to being a legitimate team this year. I think it's going to be a couple years from now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't 8-4 would be, I think you could spin 8-4. If you're a USC fan, if you follow USC or whatever, you could spin 8-4 to be a very positive thing. Especially how that 8-4 comes about, because I do agree with somebody in the chat that's saying the Pac-12 is not going to be great. And I agree with that. The Pac-12 is not great. And who's their main competition in the Pac-12 right now? Oregon, maybe. UCLA, I think, is on the rise potentially with Chip Kelly. But the Pac-12, there's not a whole lot of substance out there. So, Utah, can't forget Utah. They were really good last year. I don't know what they have coming back. I have not.
They're going to be a good team. They're going to be a good team.
Utes at all.
Oh no, you're not an avid Utah follower.
I am not. But so there'll be competition, obviously. But again, their schedule is going to be predicated on the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 is not going to be that great. So, depending on how that 8-4 comes about, I think you can, if you're Lincoln Riley, you could spin 8-4 to be a super positive thing. And I'm sure he'll try to spin whatever happens to be a super positive thing. Obviously, that's what he does. But they're going to have a ton of talent. The trenches are going to be their downfall. There's no question about it in my mind. And that's where Notre Dame's strength is. So you're going to give Notre Dame, if we're doing the whole advantage game thing, like we do going into a game, the advantage goes to Notre Dame in the trenches. There's just in both run games, and you could even say in the pass game, because of the trenches. So I do feel very confident in Notre Dame winning that game. I just feel like my issue with that game is, do they look past USC? Is that even possible? Because it's a rivalry game and all of those things. If they're down, if they're going into that game, I assume they have. I haven't looked at their schedule. If they're going into that game, they've got maybe one after that. So if they go into that game, 8-3 or 8-2, they're going to be ranked. They're going to be ranked. It's going to be a ranked opponent. You don't want to look past that game. But if they're like a 500 team, then they could bite you potentially, because you're like, it's 500 teams, no big deal. Right. That's what worries me about the USC game.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I have to feel that some of these, because I definitely get your premise, but I would say that Notre Dame gets up for USC, right? Like that's still you would certainly hope so. That is still a rivalry for Notre Dame, obviously. So I would think that even if they are a 6-6, 4-8, or whatever obviously they wouldn't be 6-6 because they only be going into their 10th game. But if they're a 6-3 team, a 7-2 team, or whatever the case might be going into that game, I would hope that Notre Dame would still be able to get up for it, even if they're not the best team. But I agree with you for your first premise that 8-4, 9-3. I think John Christophic said it in the chat. Like, I think that would be a very solid turnaround for USC, because again, they went 4-8 last year. That's a +4, +5 turnaround.
That's even a huge turnaround. Yeah.
I mean, ridiculously big, right? And it's especially for the first year with Lincoln Riley and the excitement there, you can definitely sell that we had a 4-win or 5-win improvement from the last year of Clay Helton to the first year of Lincoln Riley. And you can spin that on the recruiting trail, in the just perception of college football trail too. So yeah, I think USC is going to be a tough game, like it always is traditionally. Like I don't think that it's going to be a pushover, but I'm just not buying into USC being USC that people are acting like they're going to be this year.
Well, I'm looking at their schedule, and I do believe that it is a pretty soft schedule. They're getting the Notre Dame ACC treatment. It feels like as I look through here, they open with Rice at home, then they go to Stanford. And you would think that would be a win. You would think.
You would hope. Yeah.
So potentially 2-0 there. Fresno State at home.
Who's not a bad team. Like,
Not
that's
a
a
bad
sneaky team. They have
Agreed.
Jake Hayner coming back at quarterback, Jalen Cropper, excuse me. It's a game that USC should win.
And it's going to be on national TV too. It's going to be on Fox. So
yeah, I don't think that that's a give me game for them.
Sure.
Like, I think that they have to play well to beat Fresno State. I really do.
Then they go on the road to Oregon State.
Who's an improving team. They should win that game, but they're an improving team. Yep.
Arizona State at home.
Should beat them.
Washington State at home.
Should beat them.
Utah on the road. That's going to be a tough game for them, I would
Very
think.
tough game.
Yeah,
Very tough game.
That's going to be a tough one. Then they got Arizona on the road. They've got Cal at home. Colorado at home. Then they go to UCLA.
Which is a tougher game than people think. Yeah,
I think that's a tough game as well. And then they actually close it out with Notre Dame. So Notre Dame is their final game of the season, pending the Pac-12 championship game appearance. But I mean, I think potential losses. You're looking at UCLA. You're looking at Utah. You're looking at Fresno State. Maybe Oregon State. If they have more than 3 or 4 losses going into the season, that's going to be a tough. I don't think that I think they've lived under expectations at that point. You know what I mean? And then you've got Notre Dame, of course, and we'll chalk that up as a loss too. So you're looking at 4 or 5 losses there if they lose all of those games. So,
right.
But you're right. It's still an X game improvement over what they did last year as a 4-win team. So, Lincoln Riley will get the spin machine going, and they'll be okay. But,
and Vince, I really dislike USC. I truly do. Like, I'll put that out in the universe, but I do want USC to be a good competitive program because it makes everyone better.
We've talked about that in the past a bunch, Brian and I, about how if you want Notre Dame to be good, if you want them, if you want eyeballs on Notre Dame all the time, then their competition needs to be good too. They're never going to drop the USC game. They're not. They're not going to drop the USC game ever, I don't think. And I'm fine with that. I think USC is their biggest rival, or one of their at the very least, top 2. Okay. I don't want to see them drop USC. So having USC be good is only good for Notre Dame, because then that win actually means something. So I'm with you. And I think also when USC is good, they're in a huge market. Obviously, it's the second largest market in America. So you want that market. You want USC to be good. When USC was good in the 2000s, that was a big deal. That was a really, really big deal. People were actually staying up to watch Pac-12 games. You know what I mean? That's not really the case these days. And you can somehow watch every game that's out there if you're willing to put forth the bucks, right?
Mm-hmm.
When somebody's good on the West Coast, and I would say I want USC to be that team. If USC is really good, that's good for college football, number 1, and it's good for Notre Dame, number 2. And so I want USC to be good because it makes it even sweeter when Notre Dame kicks their butt. So I'm all about it.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And one of the other big things, Vince, obviously, we know that Notre Dame's a national brand. So even people that don't like Notre Dame are going to be watching most of these games. But I mean, the 3 biggest games that people are definitely going to be paying attention to from a national perspective are Ohio State, Clemson, and USC. So you're going to hope that USC is a relevant team. Like, you want all 3 of those teams to be good teams, so it would be a good victory, the perception wise, right? Like, you don't want to roll into the Coliseum and play a USC team that is 3-8 or whatever they are,
right?
Or the 6, like a 500 team. Like, you want them to be a really good football team because the perception matters from a national perspective. And whether you hate Notre Dame or not, and you decide that you do not want to watch any Notre Dame games because you hate the brand and you hate this and you hate that, whatever, you're going to watch the Notre Dame USC game. You're going to.
Again, it's their traditional rival. They've been playing USC since Knute Rockne, right? So it's a big game no matter what. And I have family members who went to USC. So for me, I love this game because there's bragging rights on the line. So I love the USC game personally. They're a team that I love to hate. So, but I will say this. It's a different kind of hate than Michigan for me. I actually have respect for USC fans. I really do. I have respect for that fan base. It's a respectful rivalry. It's a rivalry that I enjoy. So yeah, the USC game is a big one for me. I do enjoy it very much. So
Without the Michigan game, a year by year basis, right? Like that's the game now. That's
yes,
the big rivalry, obviously. So yeah,
I
I agree
agree.
completely.
So let's jump from one rivalry to the other. We're kind of going backwards here, but you got to follow along with us here, folks. So we kind of started talking about USC. That's the big one in the fourth quarter, no doubt about that. I think that's probably going to be the toughest test for Notre Dame in this little stretch here, the fourth quarter. So let's jump back to the beginning, and we'll go from one kind of a rivalry to another kind of a rivalry. Let's talk about Navy. This again. For those of you, I know people want to drop the Navy series. It's never going to happen, and I'm totally fine with that because I respect the history behind it. So you've got Navy. They have not been a very good football team over the last few years at all. That's disappointing to me. I do like Ken Niumatalolo. From what I can gather from him, I can't remember what Brian's opinion on him is. For some reason, it's to me, I don't think he likes him, but I don't want to put that out there, and I don't remember why it is. So
I've always liked him. That was a great pronunciation, by the way, Vince. I'm glad I didn't have to do that, man. I would have butchered that all the way, but I think he's done a pretty good job for the most part at Navy.
I do too. And look, coaching at Navy is you're attempting to put round pegs in square holes and all of these different things, right? So it's very difficult to coach at Navy. But you can get a lot out of coaching at Navy, okay? When you're talking about the men that you're coaching, and they're going to do whatever it takes, and they're going to, all of those, and I don't even want to call them cliches because they're not cliches, they're facts, right? Those are the guys that are going to be defending our country, et cetera, et cetera. The problem is the talent gap is so wide that you obviously have to run the triple option, and there's all these different things that you have to do. And I know Brian hates, the triple option. I get it. But when the triple option, and I will say this to Brian's face, and I've said it before, when the triple option is running smoothly and correctly, and you've got a guy at quarterback who can run that offense, it's like a ballet. Like it's beautiful. I'm sorry. It's beautiful.
That was such a high school thing to say, Vince. But I'm there with you, man.
I know
coached for a long time, and I loved playing against the triple option, man. It like you said. If you can't watch Navy from a few years ago and respect what Keenan Reynolds or Ricky Dobbs did as far as like the orchestrators of the triple option, I mean, is Brian going to tell us that he's a football purist and he doesn't like the triple option? Is that actually going to happen right now?
He hates it, man. He hates it. He hates the triple option. He hates that stuff. And I get it. I understand why. I totally understand it. But to be the quarterback in a triple option, you've got to be really good. You have to be able to read defenses at a split second notice. It just runs so fluid when you know what you're doing at the quarterback position, and your triple option is only as good as the quarterback because the fullback's doing one thing, the running, the wing backs are doing another. It's all predicated on the quarterback. And if he's got some wheels and he's got some brains and he's got reaction time, and if he can throw it even a little bit, that option is really, really good. So I enjoy watching the triple option when it's run properly. And unfortunately for Navy, it's just been blown up against Notre Dame in the last few years. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's the case. When you've just got meat and speed on defense, it will blow up the option. And Notre Dame has done a really good job of that over the past few years. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. I don't see, or I have not heard that Navy has, a stud quarterback, coming up the ranks as far as being able to run that triple option. And then, of course, you go to the other side of the ball, and Navy's defense is always outnumbered against, Notre Dame's offense. And I think that could be even a wider gap this year. So this is not a game that either one of us is worried about. You go on the road, you're playing in an NFL stadium. Notre Dame's used to that anyway. I don't want to say this is it's not a bye week. You still got to prepare for it. They bring guys in on preferred walk-on, situations, some scholarship times to run the triple option against Notre Dame. And there's a reason that they do that. They are well coached. Mm-hmm. This game just falls in Notre Dame's favor for the foreseeable future, especially if Navy's going to be down.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, like you said, Navy is down right now. I know Notre Dame has lost to Navy in the pretty recent past, but this should not be a contest, to be very honest. I think the one tough part, and I know we talked about this a little bit before the show, Vince, is the one thing that is a little tricky is that you're going from Clemson, who was more of a college spread type of system.
Sure.
I imagine they'll be somewhat similar, maybe different to a degree, but you imagine you'll still want to get those athletes in space and work through that type of nuance that you have. And then the week after Navy, you have Boston College, who's a very pro-style system, right? Like you're going to see multiple tight ends, George Takis. You're going to see that type of profile. So you are seeing very different things right around having to prepare from the triple option, which is going to make it tough from just a preparation perspective, which is always the tough part about Navy, because you have to, give time in the preseason to working against the triple option and assignment and all that type of stuff. But that's the one thing that has me not concerned, just something to pay attention to. Sure. But I agree. The talent gap, the game should not be close for very long in this game.
Well, and the Navy week, it's always nice to have a bye in front of Navy or something along those lines. Notre Dame's bye week is the first weekend of October, and they play Navy on November 12th. So there's no bye situation for Notre Dame going into the Navy week, and it's coming off the Clemson game. So you're right. From a stylistic standpoint, going from the air raid of Syracuse to pro-style Clemson to triple option Navy back to pro-style Boston College, back to air raid USC. Welcome to Notre Dame, ladies and gentlemen. Like this is not something that other schools really have to deal with. And I think it goes under the radar, I guess, from a national standpoint, that when you don't play in a conference, you're going to see all kinds of different offenses, and you're going to have to prepare for all kinds of different things throughout the season. And this is a perfect example. From Syracuse to USC, who knew that you would be bookend with air raid offenses, and then in the middle you've got two pro-style spreads and a triple option. Like that only happens at Notre Dame. That's a really, really good point, Ryan.
It's crazy, honestly. I think the bigger all right, so Notre Dame should overmatch them on both sides of the football, but
absolutely.
With Maris Loifau coming back and that speed that's going to be increased on the second level now with his return, I can't see Navy doing much offensively, man. Like they're trying to, they're going to give the either hand it off to the fullback or they're going to keep it for the triple option. But if you're stressed, if your defensive tackles and inside linebackers are playing good fundamental football and you're able to string this team to the sideline, to the pitch, man, the safeties that you have now, the rovers, the outside the linebackers, there's a lot of speed on the second and third level of this team coming into the year. So I think if you're just assignment sound, you are going to make this team extremely uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And then, then you talk about spreading it out for Notre Dame offensively, get it into the hands of your playmakers and things of that nature. You're just going to outclass Navy's defense. That's the thing. And Navy predicates itself on holding onto the football, time of possession, making sure their defense isn't on the field, because more often than not, their defense is going to be outclassed. And I don't mean that in a negative fashion. I just mean that, you've got guys that shouldn't be on the same field as each other. You know what I mean? And that just is what it is. So they want to keep the defense and the other team's offense off the field. So they want to possess the ball. So if Notre Dame can force 3 and outs and they can stretch the ball, like you said, and stay assignment sound within the box, the game's going to be over very, very soon. So, look, we don't need to spend a ton of time on Navy. Obviously, we will spend more time on Navy as we move into that week. But I think we can both say that as far as the quarter is concerned, this is a great way to start the fourth quarter, especially coming off what is to be expected, an emotional either win or loss against Clemson and everything that's going to be hyped up leading up to that game.
Yep.
The only thing I don't want to see is a letdown going into Navy. And they're going to have to be laser focused because of the offense. And I think that can actually benefit Notre Dame, going into that game, because, okay, guys, we got to focus on the triple option, something we don't see. We see it once a year, et cetera, et cetera. So they're going to have to be locked in after the Clemson game, and they're going to have to flush whatever happened, win or loss. You've got to flush that, and you've got to move forward with Navy. But again, the talent gap is so wide that I don't think it's going to be an issue.
I think those games against Navy and even like the UNLV, some of the easier games on the schedule, for me, those are going to be huge indicators of this team, not from a competitive perspective, but from a coaching perspective, right? Because we've seen in the past, and Brian's talked about it a ton. I think you have as well, where going into some weeks, it seems like Notre Dame's not as locked in as they should be, right? Like it's kind of looking forward and kind of looking past some programs, right? So coming into those UNLV weeks, those Navy weeks, and being locked in, and I don't want to say like this is an old expression. Some people might take it the wrong way, but like putting your foot on their throat, right? Like not showing them any just
Any
playing
mercy.
down to their
Yeah,
level, right? Like I think that that's big for me, and it's something that always frustrated me at times in the Brian Kelly era, where it just did not seem like in some of those lesser opponent games, quote unquote, that they're just not as locked in. So those games will be a big indication for me. I want to see because Coach Freeman right now is preaching that every week's the same, and we're going to attack them, and we're going to attack them and do all that type of stuff. Well, that's where you prove it right there is those games that are perceived as lesser opponents. You need to bury them early and not show that mercy,
Right, exactly. And that was, you're right. I think that was one of, Brian Kelly's faults is that he almost wanted to be Mr. Nice Guy a little too often. He really cared what other coaches thought of him. And I think that affected the way that he went about preparing for games and how he went about coaching in games. And look, games you're supposed to win by a lot, go ahead and win them by a lot. It's okay. Like that's how sport is. You know what I mean? And there's and look, I will admit that I'm the same way because I've been on the receiving end of a butt whooping as a head coach, and I've been on the giving end of a butt whooping. And there's a fine line between, going out there and embarrassing your opponent and going and winning the way you're supposed to. There is a fine line there. And it takes experience and it takes a little bit of a killer, attitude to be able to be the head coach that you need to be to get across what you need to get across. And it's not always about being liked by the other team. You know what I mean? That can't always be the case. And so hopefully, and we haven't seen what Marcus Freeman is as a head coach. We don't know, when he's going to take his foot off the gas and things of that nature. Right. But there are plenty of games on Notre Dame's schedule, we're going to be able to get an idea of the head coach, Marcus Freeman, and how he handles games that they're supposed to win by a lot. And Navy is one of those games where you should win by a lot.
Exactly. No, it's said perfectly. I want to see, I personally, as just a fan for a second, take off the analyst hat for a second. Sure, I want to see a competitive fire every single week from a team, right? Like it's not something where, like you're saying, I don't want them to just run it up. Like I'm not throwing like 50-yard bombs up by 40 points, right? But if you are physically able to dominate a team, then physically dominate them. That's just what the point blank period to it. I want to see a team play to its best potential. And I feel like taking your foot off the gas doesn't teach them how to have a killer instinct. Like that hinders your team in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. No question about it. So I think we could both agree that Navy should not be a close game. Notre Dame should take care of business coming off of the Clemson game with Navy as the first game of the first quarter. Then things start to get a little bit interesting. Notre Dame comes home. They got their final home game of the season. It's against Boston College, which you could call it a junior rivalry if you wanted to. Two Catholic schools going at each other. There's obviously a history from 93. All of the different things that you can talk about with Boston College and Notre Dame. So I would consider it like a junior rivalry. It's not it's more of a rivalry to Boston College, I think, than it is to Notre Dame. The big brother, little brother thing, that kind of scenario. But you add in that Phil Dracovic is coming back as a starting quarterback, first time back in Notre Dame Stadium since he left. So there's that whole angle. And look, there's talent on this Boston College team, and Phil Dracovic is a playmaker. And we have made no bones about the fact that we think me, Brian, I don't know your opinion on Phil. I was a big Phil Dracovic fan. I thought Notre Dame didn't handle that situation very well, and he's going to have revenge on his mind. Now, from a Boston College standpoint, that can't be the only way he's looking at this game. He's going to have to play within himself, et cetera, et cetera. But man, the senior day and all of these different things go into this game. You welcome Phil back, and it's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting game, that's for sure. And if Notre Dame isn't careful, this one could get away from them. And I think that for me, I think this of the fourth quarter, this is the trap game. Like this is the one you're looking ahead potentially to USC, who is a media darling, all of those different things. And in comes, workhorse, lunch pail, Boston College, and, they can do some things to you.
Yeah, and it's also going to be senior day, obviously, right? Because that's the last home game. So, there's a lot of distractions for that game a little bit. There's the media stuff around Phil Dracovich's return, like you said. There's senior day. There's maybe a look ahead to USC if you're in a good position from a record standpoint for a playoff run. Like, there's a lot of things that could be very distracting to a team going into the week. Again, I think this is another game where it's a big indicator of the culture and how the coaching staff is attacking these week by week assignments, right? So, it's an interesting game because this is not the traditional Boston College in a sense where it's just like, they're always going to have that lunch pail grinded out type of approach because they just put multiple offensive linemen into the NFL last year. They have another kid named Christian Mahogany who's going to be another draft pick most likely next year. And they have a good running back, Garwo, who's coming back as well, ran for over 1,000 yards. But you also have a guy like Phil Dracovic who can be a dynamic player in the passing game. And you also have Zay Flowers coming back, who, honestly, I'm Jordan Addison's the Bolitnikoff Award winner coming back, and he's obviously at USC now, so he's the best player, at least college player, on your schedule. But Zay Flowers is a dynamic player, so there's some speed more than usual, I think, on Boston College, at least a wide receiver. So your defense is going to have a tough matchup. Now, about the offensive line, I know we're not breaking this down like too intently, but they're losing 4 out of 5 offensive linemen, so you should have an advantage there. But this is Boston College is always going to come in and ready to play. Like you said, they have the chip on their shoulder a little bit when they go against the Notre Dame, because they are looked at as a little bit as the younger brother. And then you have Phil coming back. I'm sure. What was it 2 years ago at Notre Dame Stadium too, right? Where I think it was dismantled, right? Like they had a terrible shot. Phil had some nice plays early, but then Notre Dame rolled him a little bit, right?
I forgot about that, to be honest with you.
Yeah. So I'm sure his last go around here, he's going to want a great showing. He's got some talent at wide receiver. He's got a talented running back. I think it is a trap game because I think that you have a lot of distractions that week.
Sure. Yeah. Obviously, chief among those is going to be, senior day and all of that, but it would have been Phil Dracovic senior day as well, if I'm not mistaken. Right. So, this game, I always get up for Boston College just because I remember 1993 so vividly. So it's a game that I want Notre Dame to take care of business from a talent level, from a team talent level, from a most likely, what the record will be at that point in the season. Notre Dame should take care of business. It shouldn't be a thing, but the off the field stuff, that's real. There's still plenty of guys on this Notre Dame team that were teammates with Phil Dracovic, right? So, that's part of it. That'll always be part of it. Brian, obviously the coaching staff is completely different, but if you look at Boston College schedule coming into this game, let's be honest, there's plenty of opportunity for wins for Boston College. They play Rutgers, Virginia Tech, Maine, Florida State, Louisville, Clemson, Wake Forest, Connecticut or UConn, Duke, NC State going into the Notre Dame game. There's a lot of wins on that schedule, in my opinion, for Boston College. So there's a chance BC could be ranked at this point, in the season. I think your point about the offensive line is a really, really good one. Replacing 4 out of 5 offensive linemen is never an easy task, but we know they're going to have a pretty decent tight end. We know they got a speedy guy at wide receiver, and we know we got a playmaker at quarterback. That can mask a lot of things if you're Boston College. I see a lot of wins on this schedule, and then they close things out with Syracuse after the Notre Dame game. This could be a decent matchup, but again, you would expect Notre Dame to win. I'm not going to pick Boston College to win, but there's just a lot of pieces and parts to this game that I think make it interesting.
Yeah, Notre Dame's they're the more talented team, and you're at home, right? So
yeah,
it's definitely there. You forgot, I probably forgot about George Takis, your boy. It's going to be his George Takis revenge game too.
That's
man.
right,
so,
man.
It's going to be a lot of fun. I always do really appreciate the Boston College games. I feel like they usually have just competitive football games for the most part, right? So it should be fun to watch. And there's a lot of layers to it. But I agree, kind of just looking at, you kind of get a easier win potentially in Navy, and then you have to look forward to the season finale against USC the next week. That is a perfect trap game. You know, the BYU game and this game, I think BYU is probably going to be a better team, but they feel similarly in the fact that they could trip you up.
No, I completely agree with that. And then also where it lands on the schedule, right? Because, you know, with BYU, it's sandwiched in between Stanford and North Carolina. We still don't know a lot about North Carolina yet. We don't know a whole lot about Stanford. And then you place the BYU game in Vegas. That adds a whole other level of things. And then the Boston College game being sandwiched between Navy and Southern Cal, last home game, all of those different things, returning to those guys. So there's a lot of layers to this Boston College game. Again, I'm not picking Boston College to win this game by any stretch of the imagination. I think realistically, Notre Dame's a double-digit winner of this game, if not 2 touchdowns. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. But that's the definition of a trap game, right? It's a game where you could look past it. There's off the field things you got to think about. There's returning players that used to be on your team. There's all these different layers. It's the definition of a trap game for Notre Dame.
No, you're absolutely correct. Sorry, I couldn't find the unmute button again.
That's okay, man.
It's always a, because there's a little rivalry there, right? Like I subscribe to your thought that it's definitely more of a rivalry from Boston College's perspective than Notre Dame's. But I think that you're going to catch Boston College at the end of the season. So in theory, the offensive line should have itself worked out a little, because they're losing their offensive line coach, Matt Applebaum to the NFL. He went to Miami this offseason. So he's been a good offensive line coach over the last couple years, but historically Boston College has done a good job reloading and developing offensive linemen. So they should be better at that point. But to your point, Notre Dame is just a more talented team. So right. I think two touchdowns makes a lot of sense. Maybe 3 scores if you push it a little bit there. But yeah, it should be a convincing win for Notre Dame, but there are some distractions to think about for sure.
Absolutely. So then obviously we talked more about USC at the beginning. We went a little bit backwards, but then you finish off the fourth quarter and the season going out to Southern Cal, playing USC.
Yep.
It's anybody's guess what USC will be at the end of the season. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Could they be a 500 team? Could they be a couple games over 500? This is the final game of the season for both USC and Notre Dame. So this is a bit of an exclamation point for Notre Dame potentially, because I think going into this game, I think worst case scenario, they're 9-2 going into this game, in my opinion, worst case scenario. And then of course they could be 10-1, they could be 11-0 at this point. But I think worst case is they've got 2 losses, which makes this game huge. If they've got any losses on their sheet going into the final game of the season, it makes the USC game that much bigger because they're playing for something, right? And it's the last opportunity for Notre Dame to show whoever, the voters, whatever, the public, the national talking heads, it's their last opportunity to show them anything as it relates to Notre Dame. Because then you've got conference championships and all these other different things, and Notre Dame's not going to have an opportunity to play in. So this is it. This is their last chance. So they have 1 loss or 2 losses. I still feel that they're playing for something. 2 losses is going to be a little bit harder.
Yep.
1 loss, you're definitely in the mix at that point. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult for Notre Dame not to be up for this game.
Yeah, I would just be very disappointed if they weren't for some reason. I think for USC, we haven't really talked about this much, but it's definitely better for them that Notre Dame's not seen them to the last game of the season comparative to early in the season, because you would think that things would be meshing and gelling at that point, right? But it's just tough. It's really tough for me to think that USC is even though it's a home game, even though you're going out to LA and you have the night game atmosphere, most likely. I know it hasn't been announced yet, but I would think that would be a pretty primetime type of affair. You would think if USC's decent, if they're good, then absolutely. But I really find it hard to believe, unless there's just a massive improvement offensive line and defense wise, that they're going to be a team that could legitimately just take the game against Notre Dame. I think it'll be competitive for a while because, again, you have a lot of athletes at USC with Jordan Addison and Mario Williams and Caleb Williams, and the running back Dye, I think, transferred over from Oregon. There's a lot of talent on that team. But I just think the deficiencies are where you would think Notre Dame would typically be able to take advantage of you, right? So like that's, again, we'll see what they're looking like, but I'm just a little hesitant to believe in USC at this point.
Yeah, I definitely am not a believer in USC. I think Lincoln Riley will eventually get them back to where they will be in the discussion. But this year, for sure, I'm going Notre Dame on this one. I think they close out the season in pretty good fashion. Do I think it's going to be a blowout? No, I'm not saying that at all. I think USC could potentially keep it close. But this is all, predicated on the fact that USC is in a good place going into that last game. Who knows what this team is going to be? Again, we've said it. If they're spiraling, then Notre Dame needs to go in there, and you said it before, put their foot on their throat and take it. I mean, that's what they've got to do. But if they're coming into it from a competitive place, I believe they're coming off of the UCLA game as well. Yeah, they've got UCLA right before Notre Dame, which I think is very interesting as well, because that's a bigger rivalry for USC than Notre Dame, from the way I understand USC fans. So they've got back-to-back pretty big rivalry games for the Trojans. So, what are they going to be coming off that UCLA game? Are they going to be high because they just got a big win over UCLA, or did they just get pounded by UCLA and they're kind of limping into the Notre Dame game? So a lot of potential storylines coming into that game. But I think from a Notre Dame side of things, you are playing for something at that point. Unless things go completely awry from the way we think this season's going to go for Notre Dame, you're going to be playing for something. And so you've got to go out to California, take care of your business, and get out of there with no more losses than you had going in. And I think that's the biggest key.
Yeah, and I think there's also, I talked about the perception aspect of it, right? No matter if USC is good or not, it's still a nice victory to go out to Southern California and be able to beat a team like the Trojans, right? So I think that you have that layer to it as well. But again, it's a rivalry game for Notre Dame, so I don't think that you're going to have to worry about them getting up for the game. Like, I trust the staff to be able to work through those emotions and to be able to prepare the team right. We obviously have to see it a little bit, but just from everything that you're hearing and just how it seems to be moving towards, at least from a competitive atmosphere perspective, I imagine that they won't need much to get up for that game. And especially if they're sitting at 10-1 or 11-0, I would be very disappointed if they needed any other parts of them to be, to get up for that game. I think that should just be kind of ingrained in you at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the fourth quarter, arguably the toughest quarter, but I think depending on how some things can shake out throughout the season, that could change for sure. And Brian may disagree with me on that one as well. He does that a lot. But he's a jury duty, so it's our opinion, and that's what matters today. But this potentially could be the hardest quarter of the season, but it also could very well end up being one of the easier ones, depending on how things shape up throughout the college football season. So those are our quarter shows. You can go back into the archives, check out our first quarter show, second quarter show, third quarter show. Today was our fourth quarter show. Ryan, we've been starring some questions. Let's open it up to some questions here. We'll do a little bit of a mailbag, a little daily mailbag here. So if you guys have questions, go ahead and fire them in. We've got a couple of them ready to go here. Again, this is a mailbag now, so you can throw in whatever you want at this point. But we'll start with Irish Chi-Town. Who do y'all have winning the NBA Finals?
Talk about everything here, apparently.
Man, I'm not kidding.
I'm gonna pick Golden State for a couple reasons. One, I can never root for Boston because I am a Philadelphia 76ers fan. Okay. I grew up with this taste for the Boston Celtics, which I know Brian is a big fan of, the Celtics. So rooting against Brian's favorite team. Nice. But I think that Golden State is coming in the game just a little healthier. I know Boston's been battling a little bit of injury. Marcus Smart's been banged up. I'm going to go with Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and the been there, done that type of thing over Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, even though Tatum's a fantastic player, so is Jaylen Brown. I'm going to take Golden State Warriors in 6, I'll say.
Oh, okay. You're going real specific. Okay. I like that. I will say this. up front, I am not a huge NBA fan. I try to watch NBA. It's hard for me to watch NBA games. It's just too much standing around for my liking until like the last 2 minutes of the game. It's hard for me to watch. But playoff basketball is a little bit different, and I have watched a little bit of that with my kid. He enjoys watching it, so we've been watching it a little bit. I'm coming at it from a bit of a different angle, but I agree with Ryan and everything that he just said. I'm rooting for Golden State. I want Steph to get another title because anything that can knock LeBron off of his pedestal a little bit more, I am all here for. So if Steph can go out and win another one, finally get his finals MVP that he has deserved in the past, I am all for that. And we can talk about Steph Curry as opposed to that other guy in LA. So I am all for it. So I'm going with Golden State as well. I'll say 6. I like that. I think that'll be a nice series. That'll be fun for everybody. I don't see this thing going 7. I know the Celtics are branded with the defense and that they are, this defensive stalwart. Steph Curry can shoot over any defense that you've got. So I'm not too worried about that. So I will take Golden State as well. Did not see an NBA question coming. So that's good stuff. I appreciate that very much.
We get the food take questions on here too sometimes, Vince.
Oh, okay.
A bunch of weird stuff on here now.
I like weird. I'm all for weird. Believe me, I'll go off the beaten path all day. All right. We are not Marshall says, is Buchner a poor man's version of Johnny Manziel? Great athlete, but will not go through progressions and run around trying to make things happen. I could not disagree with that more. I do not see that as a good comparable at all. Now, I realize Notre Dame fans have not had the opportunity to watch Tyler Buchner sit in the pocket and go through progressions. I have seen it in practice. He will throw to guys deep into the progression. Those guys won't even realize the ball is coming because they're not used to, with the previous quarterbacks, going that deep into the progressions. And he finds ways to get them the ball. So I don't see that as an issue. He is not a Johnny Manziel, whether it's on the field or off the field for that matter. That is not who Tyler Buchner is. I think he'll play within the offense. I think he'll go through his progressions. I think Notre Dame fans are going to be very happy with Tyler Buchner. What say you?
I agree. I think that Tyler Buchner's legs are used a whole lot more in the quarterback run game, right? So off of reads and quarterback power and doing that type of thing. Manziel was a pure freelancer as a quarterback, as a passer, right? And I don't see that with Buchner. I think Buchner's much more calm in the pocket and willing to work through his reads in that regard. I understand the point of the question because they're both very athletic guys who can do things outside of structure and do all that. But I think of Tyler Buchner as a pocket passer who has the ability to run in the quarterback run game. Like that's what I see him more. I don't see him as a big scrambler. I think he's going to get the ball out of his hands until he doesn't have an opportunity to anymore. So I think stylistically it's just a little bit different.
Love it. Love it. Okay. Again, from We Are Not Marshall, with Logan Diggs hurt and Tyree injury history, how concerned is everyone with this room? Estime and Price could be a great 1-2 combo.
Yeah. I mean, I'm more concerned about Tyree's injury history, to be honest. It's something where I think it's going to be okay in the long run because you're not going to have one guy. Like, there's not going to be a Kyron Williams on the team this year where he's going to be the lead ball carrier by a landslide if there is somebody that takes that mantle. But I think you're going to have Audric Estime, you're going to have Logan Diggs, you're going to have Chris Tyree, maybe Jadarian Price even kind of fit into that equation to a degree. So sure. I don't think the volume is going to be so high that there's going to be a bigger threat for injuries. But I mean, Tyree has had, obviously he's been banged up a little bit. Diggs, I mean, obviously this offseason, he's kind of coming back from it as well from during spring practice, but I'm not overly worried about it just because I think that there's going to be enough guys that's going to be able to supplement that. So I don't think it's usually guys that break down is because of a high volume type of aspect.
Right. And I think we've been talking about the fact that I don't know, and I could be very wrong on this. I'll say me. I think it's going to be running back by committee most of the time anyway. I don't see anyone of this group being like a workhorse, 25 carries a game kind of a situation. I think the addition of Tyler Buchner as the quarterback takes a lot of pressure off of whoever the running back is, because they're not getting the ball unless they've got a hole to run through, right? They're not running into the backs of linemen. They're going to have more options with the running back situation. So I'm not saying the running backs don't matter. I think this is a very talented room top to bottom. I think that's more along the lines of why I'm excited about this room. They can sustain a couple of injuries. Okay. Now, to be elite, they need those guys to be healthy. They need Tyree to be healthy if they want to still be an elite room or a really, really good room. So that would hurt them from an injury standpoint. But I do feel that they're deep enough that they'll be able to pick up the carries of those guys and still be an effective room if both of those guys go down. So I'm not as worried maybe as some other people. Is it a concern? Sure, but I'm not worried about it, if that makes any kind of sense.
No, it does. It makes complete sense.
All right. Next one up. Blaine Tiller says, which will finish the season ranked higher nationally, the Notre Dame offensive line or the Notre Dame defensive line? Interesting question here.
It's a great question. I mean, Blaine, I expect Notre Dame's offensive line to be graded pretty nicely by the end of the season. I think that, as always, with an influx of a new coaching style, there's going to be some things, and I know you have Al Washington coming in too, but I think that you're going to see a Notre Dame offensive line unit last year that was not very good. I think you're going to have, some maturation that needs to happen at the beginning of the season. I expect it to be better than any point last year in the beginning stages, but I still think it's something where it's going to be better by the end of it, right? And I think that you can expect that type of thing. But defensive line-wise, you just have more proven commodities right now that can play at a high level. You have Isaiah Foskey, you have Jason Adamalola, Justin Adamalola. Like I just think that the defensive line is set up to be a more consistent unit. So I'm going to say the consistency outweighs the maybe rise during the season, if that makes sense.
Very interesting. I like your thoughts about the defensive guys being a known commodity, because I agree with you. It's going to be very interesting to me, if they're going to move Jarrett Patterson to guard, and now they've got Josh Lugg at guard, and what this offensive line could do as a group. I think they could be very, very good, but it's an unknown with those five guys in those five positions. Like, that's an unknown to me. And the defensive line, while, we don't know what Justin Adamiola can be like as a starter, for example, or a guy that with increased reps, but I pretty much know what I think we're going to get out of him. And I think it's going to be pretty darn good. Isaiah Foskey, I think, even if he just repeats what he did last year, it's going to be pretty darn good, right? Jason Adamiola is going to be really, really good in the middle. So the known commodity thing, I feel more comfortable going there. And the offensive line is such a difficult group to grade as a whole, like ranking them against other teams in the country. I think Notre Dame has the opportunity to be a top 10 offensive line. I really do. I think the defensive line has an opportunity to be a little bit better than that, especially from a stat standpoint. And there's no stats for the offensive line. So it's like, it's comparing apples to oranges, to be honest with you. But at the same time, I'm going to go with the proven commodity as you did as well. Tommy Gunn's coming out of left field for us here. He says, what is your favorite version of potato skins? I like the normal cheese and bacon with some sour cream and French dressing on them.
See, I don't have anything against sour cream or the French dressing, but I don't really need it. I just need the cheese and the bacon. Like okay. I like to taste those pure flavors, Tommy, but I'll accept the sour cream. It's not a bad addition. I don't personally need it.
Look, it's a necessary addition for me. I love the sour cream. This is the body of a man who eats probably too much sour cream, to be honest with you. So I didn't know that there are really multiple versions of potato skins. Maybe they're like loading them up with other stuff.
I think it's just the add-ons that you get on. I think that's where he's going from.
Gotcha.
What do you want on your potato skins?
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm a pretty basic guy. Cheese, bacon, sour cream. I'm good. You can keep the French dressing to yourself on that one. But those three, I will take on my potato skins all day long and be very, very happy about it.
Potatoes, bacon, and cheese. How can you?
It's like the three food groups. All right. Michael Parks with another NBA question right in my alley. Really enjoying this one. He says, how many points would Michael Jordan average in today's game? It would be absurd. It would be astronomical what he would be able to average, because you can't touch shooters anymore. Like you can't hand check. You can't blow on them when they come through the lane. Otherwise you're going to be like LeBron and get whiny about it. I'm sorry. He would be unbelievable if nobody could touch him. And that's what today's game is. So he would average a boatload of points, over 30, I would imagine.
Yeah, I would say 30 something's a good number. I think the one thing, you just mentioned, obviously, be able to get to the line a little bit more because, it's just a less physical game.
Yeah.
But I also think that if Michael grew up in this era, he would be a more pristine 3-point shooter, right? Like it just wasn't the era that he played in, right? Like he was a mid-range, take it to the rim, and that was his game. But in today's era, he would grow up and he would be hoisting up a few more threes. So
that's
it might be
all they do. It's all the kids do, man. Shoot threes. It's all they care about. But yes, I agree with you. He'd be a really good 3-point shooter and he'd be a good slasher and all of those things. And he would be at the line a lot. And if anybody doesn't believe me, just go back and watch some of those games from the early 90s, the late 80s, and just watch him get absolutely hammered. Watch him against the Detroit Pistons and what they did to him and realize this is not the same. This isn't your dad's NBA that's going on right now. That's for darn sure. So definitely go check that out. K-Mac, realistic chance Notre Dame makes the college football playoff this upcoming season. Also plus or minus 15 sacks for Isaiah Foskey.
I think, Vince, with the schedule Notre Dame has this year, I think if you split the Ohio State Clemson game and you take care of business the rest of the schedule, I think they can get in 11-1, right?
Oh, yeah.
So it's tough, right? Because Ohio State's a good team. You're getting them the first game of the season. Clemson's a good team, obviously, historically, coming off of a not great season. They still somehow went 10-3, right? So like they're a good program. I think if you split those games, you have a chance to make the playoffs. I really do think that you have that opportunity. So I'm going to say that there's a realistic chance. I think it's a solid chance. Yeah. Am I going to predict it right now? No, I need to see them play a little bit, but
sure.
I think you just need to split those games to have an absolute chance. 15 sacks for Foskey. I'm going under on that one. I think that he can be as impactful as last year I think he had 11 sacks last year, right? So, you could tell me he had 9 or 10 and he's a better football player. So I think that you're also going to get a little more help this year. I think guys on the defensive line, I think it's going to be a good defensive line. I think guys like Maris Loifau on the second level now with a little more speed are going to be able to provide a little something to you from a blitz package perspective. So I'm going to go under, but I obviously I think that Foskey is going to take the next step. I think he's going to be and there's going to be a lot of attention on Isaiah Foskey.
And that's the key right there. I think he's going to get a lot of attention from offensive lines. He's going to get chipped by the running back, all those different things, and he's going to allow other guys to get some sacks. So I'm going to take the under there. And I'm not going to repeat everything that you just said about the chances of Notre Dame making the college football playoff. If they are who we think they are, right, 11-1, I think is a very realistic possibility. And if you're 11-1 and you're Notre Dame, I think you're in. I don't see 4 undefeated teams, making it to the end of the season. I don't see that. And so if you're Notre Dame and you're 11-1, you've got quality wins over either Clemson or Ohio State and USC. Right. Or BYU, or, name the team that North Carolina. If those teams are as good as some people think that they're going to be, you're going to have some quality wins in there. And your loss is not going to be that bad if it's a loss to Ohio State or Clemson. And so, yeah, I love it. I think they have a realistic shot. I'm not going to go crazy. I think they have a realistic shot.
It's a much better schedule than last year. So 11-1 is not going to keep Notre Dame out this year, right? Like they were I know a lot of like weird things happened last year down the stretch, but they were on the precipice of making the playoffs last year, even though they did not have a great schedule because they were 11-1 in the Notre Dame. So yeah, I think if they're 11-1 team, they have a very realistic chance to make it.
Absolutely. Next up is Rob Compton. I watched Preston Zinter's film. He looks a lot more athletic and faster than I realized. Where do you see his ceiling and position?
So the position, Notre Dame is recruiting him as the true Mike in the class, right? Like there's a lot of guys that they see as Rover Wills or Will Mikes, maybe eventually with a guy like a Drake Bowen. But I think that Zinter is the most clear Mike in the class. And I agree, Rob. I think that he's a little bit of a high cut player, so he's got some longer legs. So I think it takes you off guard a little bit sometimes when he gets moving and you can really kind of see the acceleration. And he's kind of played all over the place a little bit on his team. He played stack a lot last year, but he's playing tight end. He's playing on the edge a little bit as a pass rusher a lot of the times. So I think that there's just some things that take the emphasis off of how athletic he is. But I agree. I think he's a lot more athletic than people give him credit for. I think he's flexible. He's worked in space a ton. So I think he's a good athlete in that regard. I think that he can be a starting caliber player at Notre Dame and, a starting Mike. I think what people think that the best of Bo Bauer could be, right? Like Bo Bauer has not hit his ceiling at Notre Dame, but I could see Preston Zinter being the best of what Bo Bauer could be if he could, kind of get the mental side of the game a little better, because I think they are similar players from a size perspective and from an athleticism perspective.
Love it. Okay, next up in the queue, Blaine Tiller says, if Coach Tommy is as successful as we hope he is, do you expect his next step to be a college head coach or going to the NFL?
Everything I've heard, and Brian obviously has had some insight into this, it sounds like, he's got the NFL background, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably more the long-term dream for Tommy Rees. So, I mean, maybe he loves college football enough to stay into that capacity and try to be a head coach, but I think that NFL is probably the more likely circumstance for him.
Yeah, it depends on what he wants. He's going to have opportunities for both, I think. And I'm not necessarily saying at the end of this year, although a coordinator spot in the NFL is more likely at the end of this year than maybe a head coaching job, because he is still young. He's still young. But, he could go be the head coach of a MAC school or a non-Power 5 or something like that. Absolutely. Is that something that he wants to do? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know Tommy on a personal level. I think that I feel like he's more suited to the NFL game. I do. I don't know that opportunity, like a coordinator's job, is going to be available at the end of this year, maybe after 2 years, where you can see growth, and you can see, okay, this is his offense for 2 years, like that kind of a thing. If you're an NFL team, you're taking a chance on essentially a 1-year coordinator, because I'm not saying he wasn't a coordinator the past few years, because I do think he was calling plays, but I also think there was a pretty heavy thumb over him. So this is his first year as the coordinator, in my opinion. So I'd like, if I'm an NFL coach, or if I'm an NFL, owner or whatever, I'm waiting a couple years to see what Tommy Rees can do as a coordinator before I offer him a coordinator's job in the NFL. I don't see Tommy leaving to be like a quarterback's coach in the NFL. I don't see that.
It's fair.
I think he would only leave for a coordinator or up, right? And same thing at the college level. I mean, you're not going to get a better job than offensive coordinator at Notre Dame, in my opinion. So he's either going to leave to be a head coach in college, or he's going to leave to be a coordinator or a head coach in the NFL. So I think it's going to be a couple of years. If I had to put my money on it, I'd say he's going the NFL route first. But You never know. Maybe he's going to really enjoy having this free use of the offense at the college level. Maybe he really enjoys recruiting. I don't know the answer to those questions. But it's definitely would be a fun thing to pick his brain about. Like, what do you enjoy about your job right now? For sure. Brandon asks, if Notre Dame misses out on Ausberry but lands Jordan Hall, do they have a rover in the class still? Impemba probably outgrows the position if we land him.
Yeah, and I wanted to pull up the second part. Brandon just said, basically, can Jordan Hall play rover? I thought he was more of a middle linebacker prospect. So, Brandon, I know there's been a lot of questions over this on the board recently about Jordan Hall. So this is basically the Jordan Hall layer to this recruitment, right? Notre Dame has Drake Bowen, who they think could be a rover will. They think that he could be a rover, but most likely he's a will long-term. They have Preston Zinter, who's the true Mike in the class. They are recruiting Jaden Ausberry to be a rover will. So he could be that rover also. If they miss out on a Jaden Ausberry, they are going to kick the tires with the Jordan Hall, because they think long-term they could be inside linebackers. They could be will linebackers to a Preston Zinter's Mike, right? So they would take Jordan Hall, from my understanding, only if Jaden Ausberry, if they weren't able to close on Jaden Ausberry. So Jordan Hall is, I don't want to call him a backup plan, but he's the next option after Jaden Ausberry. They will take Samuel Impemba no matter what. So I agree with you that most likely, I think long-term, Impemba is going to line up. If he lands with Notre Dame, I think he's going to wind up as a Viper long-term. I think he's going to be a defensive end, but they're recruiting him right now to start at rover. So he would begin his career at rover. So there's a couple options at rover. I just want to kind of get that point across that I think that there's 2 spots left for the linebackers, quote unquote. One's for Impemba, no matter where he ends up playing. And then the other one's either going to be Ausberry or Jordan Hall, hopefully, if they do not land a Jaden Ausberry out of the Louisiana area.
All right. We got another recruiting question here from Brandon. He says, is Adarius Hayes a middle linebacker, will, or rover in college, in your opinion?
I think he's a Mike long term. I think he could play Will because he's got some silly closing speed to work in pursuit. But the kid's 6'4", 215 pounds, just getting off of his sophomore year. So this kid's going to be 235, maybe 240 pounds when all is said and done. So I think he's a Mike long term because I think you can probably do a little bit more for him. But you can convince me that he's Will or a Mike long term. But I think Mike is most likely the long term destination.
We do have a super chat here from Antoine. Thank you so much, Antoine. He says, when college realignment happens, this would make ND have to join a division. Where is ND going? ACC or Big Ten, especially if college football pods up? They're not going to the Big Ten. That's just not going to happen. And if you're wondering why we say that, go check the archives over at irishbreakdown.com. There's a great series of articles over there about Notre Dame's relationship with the Big Ten. And spoiler alert, it's not good. So they're not going to the Big Ten. I do not see that happening. They have an agreement with the ACC, and I'm pretty sure that agreement says if they ever join a conference, while this agreement is, binding, that they have to go to the ACC. And that's basically what happened during the COVID year. We have talked in the past. We had a show on it, I think, or it was a lot of a show where we talked about Notre Dame kind of starting their own conference and pulling some people from, different conferences and pulling some people out of the Big Ten or the ACC or whatever. I think that has some merit to it as well. So it just really depends to me on how things unfold. Right. We'll see. I think the most logical, if they're forced, is that they're probably going to go to the ACC, but it's just because of their agreement right now.
Yeah, and they're in the agreement, and it's alignment with the other sports, obviously, right now. I know, and I know why people bring up the Big Ten because just from a regional perspective, it makes the most sense. Exactly, but yes, it would be ACC in my opinion. But again, I've talked about this a lot, Antoine. I know you want to ask the question because it's an interesting question. I get it, but I don't think Notre Dame needs to join a conference. Like, I don't think there's a need for it. I really don't. So
unless they get completely just boxed out from winning a national championship, which, as long as Jack Swarbrick is the athletic director, I don't see that happening. He's good at what he does, and he makes sure that Notre Dame has a seat at the table. I mean, he's done that since day one of him walking in the door, and I don't see that changing as long as he's there. So I am very confident that Notre Dame's not joining a conference anytime soon.
Agree.
Because they're not going to unless they're forced to. I don't think Jack's going to allow that. So
agree.
I have a lot of faith in Jack Swarbrick, obviously. And the last, 6 months have done even more for me to have faith in Jack Swarbrick. So I will say that as well.
Yep.
I don't see any more. Are you seeing any in there, my friend?
No, I saw Tendall. I'm not going to pronounce your last name, Tendall. I apologize. Tenday, I'm sorry. Have you seen Malachi Coleman out of no, I have not seen him. I'm sorry. I have not seen a Malachi Coleman. I can tell you that he's not an offered player by Notre Dame right now. So that's, have not seen him, but that's the only other one I saw, Vince.
Okay. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell as well, because you just never know when we might decide, let's have a show. And then you can be notified that that's about to take place. So thank you for joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Thank you, Ryan. Whoop, you're over there. Thank you, Ryan. Much appreciated. And we will be back tomorrow because tomorrow is Friday, and it is the Friday free-for-all mailbag. And it's the first Friday out of school, so I'm fired up about it. It's going to be a lot of fun. So make sure you join us tomorrow, 1:00 for the Friday free-for-all mailbag. So for Ryan, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown.